Hello, everyone, and welcome to our fundamental series, Crash Course in Interviewing. I am Jody Haley. I'm the Assistant Dean for Career Development, and I am joined here by our Associate Director, Chris Gerlica, and our Assistant Director, Nina Abenante. And we're going to go through a couple of different slides to sort of help you understand the interview process, what to expect, how to prepare, and things like that. So let's jump right in. We're going to start with the purpose of the interview here. The interview is used by an employer to make sure that they want to work with you temporarily as an intern or long-term post-grad employee. These interviews can be virtual or in person. We'll discuss this a little bit later on, but it's pretty basic. The purpose of the interview is to understand who you are, and an opportunity to talk with you, the employer to talk with you about your job experience, your classroom experience, anything that you brought to the table that might make sense for them in the course of the application process while you're interested in this job. The interview is not a therapy session. This happens, I think, a lot for students where they think that this is an opportunity to sort of lay everything on the table. You want to stay on task to let an employer understand why you might be the best candidate for this job. You want to make sure that you are discussing your skill set, your experiences in relation to the job that you are interviewing for. You don't want to get off topic. It can be very easy to get off topic, and we want to make sure that you are very conscientious of staying on task and understanding that the employer is there. And usually in a short amount of time, right? There's not a lot of time for you to interview. They're typically 30 minutes long, and you want to make sure that you make the most of your time while you're there with them and allowing yourself to sort of discuss your qualifications as concisely as possible. Okay. We're going to keep moving on to our interview prep, the most exciting part. I recognize that the research part of this might be a little bit daunting, but you want to spend a little bit of time, and it doesn't need to be a ton of time, but you need to spend a little bit of time researching the employer. Most importantly, I think from our end is making sure you understand what the employer's mission is. What makes them unique? Understanding an employer's mission allows you to also understand how you might fit into this organization or this firm. And I think that those things are important also for you as a person when you're interviewing. You want to look up your interviewers on either LinkedIn, or if they have a LinkedIn profile, or Google to get a sense of who they are. I think it's also allows you to not be as nervous when you're interviewing, when you can understand who your interviewers are, sometimes what they look like. It allows you to sort of calm those nerves if you have any when you're interviewing. But you want to really make sure that you understand who your employer is. What type of work do they do? If you're, what type of cases are they covering? What type of pro bono work do they do? You want to make sure that you understand the organization as a whole when you're interviewing, because when you show up, you really don't want to show up and not have any idea what's happening, because it'll be very apparent to the interviewer that you have done no research whatsoever. And to them, that conveys that you're not interested. Okay. So you want to make sure that this research aspect of it is really important and that you spend some time with it. As part of that, you also want to prepare some answers to the basic types of questions that you might be asked. You might feel like you want to fly by the seat of your pants in an interview, but that is not recommended from anyone in this office. You want to make sure that you can just sort of basic types of questions. And that will differ based on whether you're interviewing with a private law firm, whether you're interviewing with a public defender's office, whether you're interviewing with a judge, right? So you want to make sure that you have basic types of questions that might be asked, and we'll go over some of that as well later on, but you want to make sure that you are prepared to answer these questions. And sometimes that looks like writing them down and writing your answers to them down. Sometimes it's rehearsing in a mirror. Sometimes it's rehearsing with a friend. You want to make sure that you feel comfortable answering these very basic questions. Why did you go to law school? What are you most interested in? What do things look like for you in 5 years? Just some basic things that can help you also understand why you're applying for this job, why you're interviewing for this position. And I think sometimes that's helpful to you while you're in this process of researching and preparing your answers to these questions, because it'll make you feel more comfortable about the interview as well. At the end of an interview, almost always, an interviewer will say to you, "Do you have any questions for me?" One of the worst things you can say is, "Nope, I'm good. I'm all set. I have no questions." Even if The interviewer has done a wonderful job of explaining not only what you'll be doing in that role or has answered every question that you think you might have. And you're like, I really don't have any questions. This feels great, or I feel comfortable. You always want to ask some questions. It allows the interviewer to feel like you want to be there and that you are curious about their organization, about the work that they do, and that you have a genuine interest in this job. Common topics can be expectations. They may have answered that in the course of the interview, but you can always say, what does a day-to-day look like for an intern here? As a 2L, hiring timelines, like, I would love to know when I might be hearing back from you. And if those questions have all been answered, my favorite is to sort of throw a question back about the interviewer. You'll know how long they've worked there, obviously, because you've done your research, but you might want to say, what's the most interesting case you've worked on while you've been here? Anything just to allow them to see that you are interested in their work and what they do. They will remember you much more if you ask a question that is thoughtful. They will remember you also if you say, I don't have any questions. So just remember that, okay? If you are extraordinarily nervous about an interview, and that does happen, and we certainly understand that, you can request a mock interview from the Office of Career Development. We encourage you to try to put all of this interview prep together on your own. Because we know that you are capable human beings. You've made it to law school. You are hopefully have been networking in the opportunities you've had since then. But if you are very nervous, you can request a mock interview with our office, with any of our counselors, and we'll be happy to help you. And we're going to move on to what you must wear to an interview. I want to be really, really clear that you have to wear a suit in an interview. There's really no other variation here. I recognize that this might not be something that everyone wants to hear, but it is the only option when you are interviewing. Even if you've heard from a friend that the dress code is casual at the organization or firm that you're interviewing at, that is fine. You still must wear a suit. And as far as I'm concerned, a suit is one of the easiest things, very gender nonconforming. You can wear a suit, pantsuit, skirt suit, whatever suits you, you may wear, but it must be a suit. And if you have any questions, you obviously can ask anyone in our office, or you can go to the link we have here for more specific advice about that. But please, please, please wear a suit, even if you know that the employer itself's dress code is casual. Please wear a suit to the interview. It is something that they will remember. If you are not wearing a suit, they will absolutely take note of that. And I really, really don't want any of you to be in a situation where you miss out on a job simply because you weren't wearing a suit to an interview, which is an expectation in the legal profession. I'm going to pass it now along to Nina.
Sorry. Hi, guys. So we are going to discuss some of the expectations in interviews. We're going to start with in person, starting with obviously the dress code and wearing a suit, as Jody mentioned before. And then, additionally, we're going to talk a little bit about body language. This is important, right? Because you're in person, they're seeing you in your suit. And you want to make sure that when you introduce yourself, you're clear, you look them in the eye, you shake their hand firmly, all these typical things that you expect in like a business setting. Another important thing that we don't have written down here, and this is easier said than done, but just try to be comfortable. If you're stiff and if you're, looking uncomfortable, if you're feeling uncomfortable, you're looking uncomfortable. So easier said than done. I totally get that, but just try to be comfortable. Make sure you maintain eye contact with all of the interviewers. If you're being interviewed by a panel, don't just focus on one person. Try to, look at everybody. They will all be talking to you, asking questions, and maybe they're not, but you still want to engage with them in some way. Additionally, and very importantly, when you're arriving to an interview in person, you should plan to be early. You don't know what the traffic is going to be like. You don't know what the Washington Bridge is going to be like. You just don't know. So plan to be early to this interview. That way, if there is some kind of issue on your way there, you don't know what the parking is going to be like, whatever that may be, you have plenty of time and you are not late to your first impression at this employer. If you are late to your interview, they do not have high expectations for you to work there, and that is not a good thing. So just plan for that. So additionally, we're going to talk about virtual and phone interviews. This obviously, all the things that Jody has talked about up to this point ring true for both in-person and virtual interviews as far as preparation and thinking about what they're going to be asking you. But there are some differences. You still need to be dressed nicely for a virtual interview. We're talking suit, at least, a jacket. Um, but there are other things to consider. So your surroundings are very important. You want to be in a quiet place. You don't want anybody else to be in the room. You don't want your pets to be in the room, your kids to be in the room. Try to close the door, turn off the TV, turn off the ringer of your cell phone, just anything that could interrupt the interview. Make sure you do your best to mitigate that before it even starts. Blurring your background is always helpful. If you don't have an area of your home that's like a dedicated office, that's totally fine. You can blur your background and just let that be. And then additionally, just make sure, obviously, you guys all go to school and I'm sure you have Zoom classes or things like that, but just be sure that your internet is working and you're in a location of your home that it is reliable. Also, eye contact during a virtual interview is strange, right? Even though we're so used to Zoom, it's a little bit unusual. So making eye contact is looking at the camera. It is a little weird. You don't want to be like staring at it the entire time, but just be mindful that looking at the person on the screen does not signal to them that you are looking at them. It's a strange one, but just keep that in mind so that you can kind of let them know that you're engaging with them and that you're paying attention, basically. Okay, so some of the basic interview questions that you're pretty much always going to be asked, no matter what the interview is first and foremost, tell me about yourself. This, I think, is a pretty misleading question because it could mean a lot of things. But in this setting, in an interview while you are a student, I typically say it's a personal narrative. And by that, I mean it is a narrative about your education and your um, career goals. So you can say, I went to undergrad for political science, and that led me directly into law school. I am incredibly interested in becoming a public defender. This is why I applied to this position. I'm really interested in your organization because of X, Y, and Z. So I typically tell my students it's past, present, future. How did you get here? What are you doing right now? Where do you plan to go? And that's a really easy formula to think about this question and have it pre-prepared so you know your general storyline and it's easy to just come up with it in conversation. Um, why do you want this position is obviously a question that you will be asked in an interview. And you should hopefully have a good reason for this. Whether it be, this is where you want to be or something that happened in your life that led you to this particular practice area. But you want to be able to talk about why you were interested in them, what about their organization is enticing to you, and then additionally, what experience you hope to gain and how they do these things throughout their practice. So this is something to think about. It should be a thoughtful answer. Depending on if it's public sector or private sector, it can be a little bit different. Typically, public interest careers want to see that you have like a genuine passion for their work because it is hard work. And then in the public sector, or in the private sector rather, sometimes it's a little bit harder. Why are you really passionate about tax law? I don't know, but you can still think about it. Obviously, it's something that you're interested in, and you can come up with a good reason because obviously you're applying to the job, so you do have a reason. And lastly, obviously review your own application materials. You might have applied to the job a little while ago. Maybe it took a little while to get the interview. Maybe you applied to several jobs. Review the application materials that you used for this job. Reread your cover letter, review your own resume because you want to be well aware of the things they're going to talk to you about and not have to refresh yourself or have them refresh you. You want to be able to know exactly what you said in that cover letter. So if they bring it up, you are aware of what they're talking about. Okay, and I'm gonna pass it over to Chris.
Thanks, Nina. So I'm going to talk a little bit about some very specific interview questions that you may or may not get in your interview. Nina talked about sort of the ones to definitely prepare for, but these are sort of in the back of your mind. You should be a little prepared in case they show up. The first and more common of the ones I'm going to talk about are behavioral interview questions. So these are questions that require you to share a short story about an experience that you once had. Typically, and primarily, a work-related experience. And that will make the stories much stronger. So these are questions that are like, talk about a time when you made a mistake and how you recovered from it. And that is really asking about your ownership of assignments or projects. These questions are always going to feel a little tricky because they're asking what they're asked the question itself does not actually reflect what they're seeking the information on. So we have a bunch of examples here as well, such as, what did you do the last time things did not go according to plan? And that is about your problem solving abilities and how do you handle pressure, those type of things. So these questions, you just have to have like sort of a bank of stories because you may get one or two in an interview and they'll be peppered in with relatively more basic questions like, what are your strengths and weaknesses? Those type of questions. Um, so be prepared, essentially. We do have, if you are worried about them, we have like an old article that has some examples, but we can definitely talk about those and what kind of stories are appropriate if you want to talk about those. But this is just something to be aware of, and not be shocked when you get them, because you don't want to just be sitting there sputtering as you think about a story, to tell them that is enough where it doesn't make you look bad, but it's also enough to like show growth and all of those things. And this can be a little tricky. Um, and then next, I want to talk about some public sector differences. And so one is hypothetical. So this is an interview type of question that is very specific, and most of you will likely not encounter them. Hypotheticals are primarily used by the public sector, and even within the public sector, they are almost exclusively used by public defender offices. There are some other public interest employers that do utilize them, but they are much rarer. And so if you are a public interest and you're a student, be prepared that these may happen. So a hypothetical is as it is, right? They will ask you a question or give you a fact pattern of a situation that may happen to you while working in this job. Oftentimes, these are for postgraduate employment opportunities. Every once in a while, you may get them for student attorney positions. If you get a hypothetical, they will often sound like, you're in court and then this thing happens with your client, or an unrepresented person comes up to you and starts asking you questions, legal questions. What do you do? And of course, your first answer is always going to be, well, I will find my supervising attorney. And then they will change the hypothetical to be like, well, you can't find them. They're lost in time and space. What do you do now? And so you need to come up with sort of an answer, and they're not always looking for like a correct legal answer. They're looking for they're testing out your thought process. A lot of these public interest experiences when you're a postgraduate or a student attorney, you are out there kind of on your own a little bit. You're in the courthouse, you do have your supervising attorneys around, but you may encounter sticky situations, particularly ethical sticky situations. And so these employers just want to make sure that they can put you out there and feel secure and confident that you will present yourself and their office well and not get into trouble. And so it's much like, and I know, you're in law school, I'm a lawyer. We don't do math, but this is very much a show your work kind of situation, like math class. Like you want to make sure that you show each of your choices and show them and not just jump to the end of what you would do. Give them the logic that you are following to get to that certain point. Um, and that will help you do better at hypotheticals and also help them understand. Because if you are maybe like not saying the exact correct thing, but you're kind of on the right track, that's really easy to train right? And so that's very different than sort of if you just give an answer and it's so off base and they don't know how you got there. And then they won't hire you. Another major public sector difference, so this is not necessarily in the questions themselves, but you must emphasize dedication. I think this was already mentioned a little earlier, but with public interest ones, they are looking particularly to how much you want to be doing this work, how much it means to you, what your passion is. You can be very personal in these interviews when you talk about these type of things. They like those personal connections and to understand what's driving you. A lot of these opportunities are either unpaid or low pay. Both student ones definitely unpaid, but post grad often are not being paid a lot. So they're kind of testing to see if you will get burnt out. They do not want to be considered just sort of a second choice kind of employer. And so they're trying to find the folks who this is their first and only choice quite often. So these are those important things to look at. And then next, I want to dive deeper into questions to ask. Jody already brought this up earlier in your prep, but this is sort of in our timeline of the interview when you would be talking about them, right? So the interviewer will always ask that, do you have any questions? And as Jody said, the worst answer is no. And so you definitely want to have some basic questions like expectations, what's the day-to-day look like? But I agree with Jody, you want to talk about them. Lawyers, we love talking about ourselves. It's like one of our favorite things to do. And so ask about them. Why do they love this work? All those type of things. If this is a internship posting, not a postgrad, but internship, you can always ask for advice as well. A lot of times, attorneys like to have sort of a mentor vibe. They think they're really great mentors. So asking them sort of advice for your career path or classes, that type of thing is always a great question too. And we recommend having about 5 prepared for when you go into the interview, because oftentimes during the interview, your employers will maybe cover some of your questions. And so you want to have at least like 3 that can survive to the end. And so having more will not put you in that position where you've drafted some questions, but they covered them all. And so then you actually don't have any, or you have to be on the spot. And there's a lot of like ho humming until you can come up with an idea. And so always prepare more so that you don't have that situation. And this is a general good rule of thumb. Um, and then sort of finally, so after you've had your interview, um, we talk about 2 things. One, send a thank you email. We do have a sample script of this on the in the online resource library in Simplicity, but you should send one to each interviewer that you had. And sometimes too, if you're interviewing with a larger firm, if there was a HR professional or someone like a recruiter who's organizing everything for you, it may not be a bad idea to send them a thank you as well, just for organizing your interview and all of that. But definitely with the interviewers, send different ones and make sure that they are tailored to that interviewer. So if there's anything particular, like you can talk about with them so it does not look the same, because they will talk and they will be like, oh yeah, I got one too. And then they're all the same. And that almost defeats the purpose. Where it feels like you just did it to do it and not an actual authentic thank you. And so make sure you mention anything. So if you learn through chit chat that you both have, follow the same sports teams or you both have the same hobbies, mention that. Or if they give you really great advice, or talked about like why they love being there, reflect back on that and mention that in there. We recommend sending your thank you email within 24 hours of the interview, and so that you can get it off your plate and they will also remember. If they are a larger employer that does use recruiters and things, oftentimes those interviewers will send them over to whoever's making those true hiring decisions to kind of highlight that like you get it. Because this is also training you for good client interactions as well and good client communication. And so make sure. And then also set your expectations correctly. You will likely get a timeline from the employer. The employers always, always, always think that they're going to make a hiring decision much faster than reality. And so set your expectations. If you do not hear from them and they told you, yeah, you'll hear from us by the end of the week, give it 2, if not 3 weeks. They're slow. Our recommendation, if you have not heard a peep from them, is to follow up after 2 weeks from your interview date. That is a good time to have a nice, polite follow-up, just to say, thank you again. It was a pleasure to interview. I'm just checking in on the timeline, and if you need anything extra from me. We also do have a sample script of that on the same document as our thank you email. And so that's sort of the best way to do it. Don't panic. I know while you were interviewing and looking for something, you're sort of like panic because everything's happening like fast for you and like all your friends and all that sort of stuff. But the employers, they're not necessarily in a rush, especially for summer employment and sometimes particularly for post grad if they're hiring before the bar results. They don't see a rush. And so don't panic. No news is all right news. So, um, and with that, we hope that we kind of helped you out with some like basics of interviewing. And if you have any other further questions or specifics, you can always make an appointment with any of us to talk about that. And so I don't know if Jody or Nina have anything else to say. Um,
Oh, I'm just good luck. You're going to do great. Be confident and have the confidence in yourself that you're going to do great. Do your research, and we're excited for you. And good luck. Bye, everybody.